My wife said I was just a co-parent, so I became one and took everything with me, and then I met Claire back in 2008, during the second semester of our sophomore year at a university in Richmond. She walked into our ethics class like she owned the place, hair dyed fire red, arm full of books by Gloria Steinem and bell hooks, and the kind of intensity that made every sentence sound like it was being delivered from a podium. Meanwhile, I was on the opposite end of the spectrum, working 30 hours a week between two jobs, majoring in finance, obsessed with spreadsheets and debt-free graduation. She thought the stock market was modern sorcery, and I thought philosophy majors were just rehearsing arguments to win Facebook debates. Still, I was pulled to her instantly. She was magnetic and loud, and so sure of herself that I almost envied it. I liked how she challenged everything. She liked how I didn't fall apart under pressure. We started dating a few weeks later. She told me over drinks at a dive bar that she'd never seen herself ending up with a numbers guy, and I told her I'd never dated anyone who quoted Simone de Beauvoir mid-conversation. We moved in together the summer after graduation, right into a narrow, overpriced townhouse on the edge of Carytown. We argued about everything: rent, laundry, politics, what counted as a real meal, but always found our way back to each other. We got married in 2016, in a botanical garden surrounded by Claire's writer friends and my accountant buddies who looked like they'd landed on Mars. In 2018, our lives changed for good. Claire got pregnant with twins, and even though the timing was terrible, my promotion was still in limbo, and we were barely keeping up with rent. It was one of the happiest moments of my life. We had a boy and a girl, Julian and Ivy. I still remember holding them both that first night and thinking that nothing would ever be more important than them. Not work, not money, not anything. I shifted my hours, took on more responsibility, and eventually climbed the ladder to become a senior strategist at the investment firm I'd been grinding at since graduation. Claire, on the other hand, was still figuring out what she wanted. She started in HR, said it was too corporate and soul-sucking, quit, and spent 6 months trying to build a freelance marketing business. That crashed when she realized she hated client deadlines and accountability. Then came the blog, her passion project. It was called Woman Rewritten, and it was supposed to be a hub for self-empowerment, growth, feminist wellness, and challenging societal norms. She poured herself into it. I gave her everything she needed: time, money, space, encouragement. I covered the bills while she found herself, supported her when she flew to 2 different women's empowerment retreats in Sedona, paid for her coaching sessions, and let her transform our guest room into a studio space even though I'd been using it for remote work. At first, I was proud of her. Claire always said she wanted to change the world, and I believed she could, even if it started with a blog read by 50 people. But over time, something shifted in the way she looked at me. The woman who once called me her rock now seemed perpetually irritated by my existence. Conversations became transactional. Sex became infrequent and, when it happened, mechanical. She was always tired, or focused, or going through some internal process I wasn't allowed to interrupt. She said I was too traditional, that I didn't challenge her enough intellectually. She started talking about male fragility and emotional labor, and how marriages like ours were part of the larger problem. At first I thought it was the blog talking, that it was just a phase, or maybe the online spaces she was spending so much time in. But then it became clear that she really believed it, that I was the problem she'd been writing about all along. Meanwhile, I kept showing up. I got up at 5:30 every morning to make breakfast and pack lunches before work. I stayed late at the office when I needed to, then came home to help with math homework, soccer practice, bath time. I'd be the one sitting through parent-teacher conferences while Claire posted on Instagram about self-worth and being more than just a mom. I wasn't looking for praise. I just wanted a teammate. Instead, I felt like a ghost moving through the house. Useful, dependable, invisible. Looking back, I think the disconnection started right after the twins turned 4. That's when Claire stopped pretending. She spent more time on her phone than with the kids. She'd post these inspirational captions about healing, boundaries, and alignment while I was literally the one folding laundry at midnight. She wrote about radical self-prioritization and reclaiming identity. But all I saw was someone who checked out of her own family and called it growth. I kept trying to bridge the gap, offered to watch the kids so she could go out with friends, suggested therapy when things felt tense, tried to initiate conversations about our relationship, but she either brushed it off or accused me of being controlling. I stopped asking for things after a while, stopped hoping for date nights, stopped trying to bring up hard topics. Every conversation led back to how I wasn't doing the work or meeting her vibrational frequency, whatever the hell that meant. I remember once asking her if she wanted to go see a movie, and she looked at me like I'd suggested we rob a bank. She said she didn't have space for distractions, that her energy was already depleted from carrying the emotional load of our marriage. I started feeling ashamed of how much I still cared, how much I wanted to fix things. I was carrying everything, financially, emotionally, logistically, and still being told that I wasn't enough. But I kept going. For the kids. For the memory of who we used to be. For the tiny, stupid hope that if I just tried a little harder, maybe she'd look at me the way she used to back when we were just two broke college kids sharing a futon and a dream. Then came the night it all broke open, the night she finally said out loud what she'd probably been feeling for years. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I'd just helped Julian finish a solar system model for school and read Ivy 2 chapters of her book before bed. I was exhausted, still wearing my dress shirt from work, and all I wanted was to unwind and maybe watch an episode of something with her. I found Claire in the kitchen, rinsing a dish like we were in some commercial for quiet domesticity. I said hey, mentioned maybe watching that new documentary she'd been talking about. She didn't even turn around, just kept scrubbing and said, "You're just a co-parent to me now, Nate. Not a life partner. No drama. No warning." Like she was reminding me to pick up eggs. I stood there for what felt like hours, listening to the sound of her rinsing the plate like nothing had just exploded in my chest. She didn't look up, didn't turn around, didn't even pause to see if I'd caught the grenade she lobbed into our marriage. It was the stillness that killed me more than anything, the quiet coldness, the complete lack of recognition for what she'd just said. I asked her, trying to keep my voice steady, if that's really how she saw me now. She shrugged without even glancing in my direction and said something like, "You know this hasn't been a real relationship for years, Nate. We're just coexisting." It hit me like a slap I didn't see coming, not because I hadn't sensed the distance growing, but because I'd convinced myself it wasn't permanent. She kept talking, stacking more layers of detachment on top of that one brutal statement. I didn't challenge her intellectually. I didn't understand her as a woman evolving in a modern world. Apparently, I hadn't evolved, hadn't grown the way she had, as if becoming a father, building a career from the ground up, supporting her dreams while holding everything else together didn't count for anything. She said we didn't need to end things, that the kids needed stability, but we should be honest about what our relationship really was. I was standing in the middle of the kitchen, shoes still on, sweat still drying on my collar from chasing work and homework and dinner prep, and she was giving me a polite, rehearsed eulogy for our marriage like it was some kind of business merger that didn't go through. I didn't scream or cry, didn't ask her to reconsider or tell her she was wrong. I just said, "I see," and walked upstairs, left her standing by the sink with her clean plate and her detached self-righteousness. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I stared at the ceiling while her words replayed on a loop like an old voicemail I couldn't delete. I thought about the dinners I cooked when she was too drained from channeling energy. I thought about every parent-teacher conference I sat through alone while she was networking with women from her mindfulness group. I thought about how she used to reach for me at night without saying a word, and how now she turned her back before I even hit the mattress. Sometime around 3 a.m., the weight of everything finally settled on my chest like a block of cement. I realized that for the past few years I'd been sprinting toward a finish line she'd moved every time I got close. I worked longer hours, got in better shape, listened harder, gave her more space, sacrificed my downtime, all to keep this thing alive. But every time I tried to get close, she shifted the goalposts. If I opened up emotionally, she called it performative. If I pulled back, she said I was emotionally unavailable. If I asked her how she was feeling, she said I was pressuring her. If I didn't ask, I was accused of not caring. It wasn't that I'd failed her. It was that she'd already decided I didn't measure up and was waiting for me to fall so she could feel justified. By morning, something inside me had gone numb. I didn't feel angry or heartbroken anymore. Just hollow. Empty like a theater after the show's over and everyone's left. I got up early like always, made breakfast for the kids, packed their lunches, and made sure their backpacks were ready. Claire came down wearing that silk robe I bought her for our anniversary, one she used to thank me for with a kiss and a laugh. Now she wore it like a costume. She poured herself coffee and kept sneaking glances at me, like she was expecting a conversation, an argument, maybe a desperate plea. But I was done begging to be seen. She finally asked if we were going to talk about what she'd said last night. I told her we already had. She'd been very clear. She tried to explain that she wasn't trying to hurt me, that she was just being honest about how disconnected she felt. I nodded and said I appreciated her honesty. That's what she always said she wanted, emotional transparency. So now she had it. And I had clarity. From that moment on, I started living like the role she assigned me. Just a co-parent, nothing more. No small talk, no check-ins during the day, no favors, no extra energy spent holding together something she'd already labeled dead. When she got home from her women's circle that night, I was helping the kids with homework. She came in, dropped her designer bag on the couch like she always did, and waited. I didn't ask about her evening, didn't offer to warm up dinner. Just told the kids I'd be in my office if they needed anything and walked out. In that office, I opened my laptop and created a file I titled Exit Plan. I wrote down everything I'd need to do to protect myself and the kids if this went where I suspected it was headed. The first item was, call a lawyer. I didn't tell Claire. I didn't need drama. I needed information. I wanted to know my rights, what custody might look like, how to start separating a life I'd invested in alone for years. The attorney I spoke with was blunt but empathetic. Based on my role in the kids' daily lives, she believed I had a strong case for joint custody, possibly even primary, depending on what documentation I could gather. She advised me to begin building a record, emails, events, doctor visits, school reports, anything that showed I was the engaged, responsible parent. So I did. I kept track of every missed pickup, every appointment I handled, every time the school emailed me instead of her. I stopped sharing plans. Took the kids out on weekends without announcing where we were going. If she texted asking, I waited an hour and sent a simple reply, we're out. Be home later. I started eating better, working out again, found my old rhythm. I dropped 30 pounds in a few months, bought clothes that actually fit, and finally got rid of the tired haircut I'd had since our wedding. Claire noticed. She said I looked fresh, like I'd been on vacation. I just smiled and said, been getting sleep. I also started seeing friends again. Guys I hadn't had a beer with in years because I was too busy picking up the slack. I joined a rec basketball league on Saturdays, something I hadn't done since the kids were born. I stopped existing solely for the house I was no longer welcome in. Claire noticed that too. The first time I took the kids out for a full Saturday, she was waiting on the couch when we got home. Pretending to scroll her phone, she asked where we'd been. I said out. Her lips thinned, and she said it would be nice if she knew where her children were. I told her I didn't think she cared, since she hadn't joined us in months anyway. She called it unfair. I said it was just an observation. When the kids ran upstairs to wash up, she followed me into the kitchen and said I'd been acting off. I told her nothing was going on. I was just honoring the role she assigned me. She asked if we couldn't still be partners in other ways. I looked her in the eye and said, you mean like roommates who share kids? That kind of partner. That was the moment she started realizing she'd miscalculated. She thought she could downgrade me emotionally and still have the convenience of a husband when it suited her. She thought I'd accept whatever scraps she felt generous enough to toss my way. She hadn't considered what would happen if I actually took her words seriously and became exactly what she said I was. After that conversation in the kitchen, the one where she acted like she was doing me a favor by demoting me in my own life, something switched off inside me, like a current that finally short-circuited from too many power surges. I stopped waiting for her to change her mind, stopped hoping for some sudden realization where she'd come running back and say it had all been a mistake. I wasn't going to stand around holding open a door she'd already walked through. If she truly saw me as nothing more than a logistical partner, then I'd become exactly that and nothing more. The next morning was the first real test of this new approach, and it hit harder than I expected. I made the kids breakfast like usual, packed their lunches, signed Julian's math test and Ivy's field trip form without saying a word to Claire. She came down late, scrolling through her phone in that detached way she always did, as if even existing in the same room was optional now. I didn't comment on her hair, or ask how she slept, or even offer to pour her coffee like I used to. I focused on the twins, kept my answers short, and moved through the motions like a background actor in a movie she was starring in alone. Claire noticed the difference almost immediately, but she didn't know what to do with it. She kept looking at me like she was trying to find something in my expression, like she couldn't decide whether I was angry or broken. The truth was, I wasn't either. I'd moved past both. I was indifferent now, not because I didn't feel anything, but because feeling had become dangerous, like touching an open flame hoping it wouldn't burn the same way twice. Over the next couple weeks, I kept my head down and made the shift from emotional husband to operational father. I stopped texting her during the day, didn't ask what time she'd be home, didn't initiate conversations about dinner or weekend plans. If she needed something, she'd have to bring it up. If she didn't, I wasn't chasing after it. I wasn't being cruel. I was simply matching her energy, reflecting back the same level of emotional investment she'd offered me. She tried to test the waters a few times, probably to see if I was bluffing or just sulking. She'd ask about something from my day, expecting me to light up and engage like I used to, but I'd just respond with the bare facts and move on. When she complained about being tired after her content strategy session for the blog, I nodded and kept cleaning up dinner without offering sympathy. The twins picked up on the shift too, though I did my best to keep everything smooth for them. I didn't want them caught in the fallout, didn't want them wondering why Dad was quieter or why Mom seemed confused all the time. The more detached I became, the more she seemed to unravel in small ways. At first, she tried to reclaim my attention by slipping back into old habits, standing a little closer, asking what I wanted from the grocery store, wearing the perfume I used to compliment her on without being prompted. But I didn't take the bait. I was polite but indifferent, responsive but distant. I wasn't cruel. I was just done handing over emotional currency to someone who saw me as a background utility. I also stopped rearranging my life to make hers easier. No more rescheduling meetings so she could go to another retreat or empowerment lunch. No more bailing her out when she forgot the kids' permission slips or couldn't make it to school functions. I started keeping a private log, just like the lawyer suggested, dates, times, responsibilities, receipts. I documented every dentist appointment I booked and every parent-teacher conference I attended solo. I recorded who packed the lunches, who reviewed homework, who signed off on projects. All of it in a file she never saw, but one I read like scripture on the nights I felt myself slipping into the old rhythm of trying too hard. And as I quietly gathered receipts and shifted weight off her shoulders and onto mine, where it had honestly already been for years, I started taking better care of myself too. I changed my diet, cut out the fast food and late-night snacks. I started lifting again during lunch breaks and went on early morning runs while the kids were still asleep. Over 3 months, I dropped nearly 35 pounds, rebuilt my muscle, bought clothes that fit me properly, and even swapped out my beat-up work bag for something that didn't scream function over dignity. Claire noticed. Of course she did. One evening, as I was tightening my tie before a work dinner I didn't even mention to her beforehand, she walked in and just stood there in the doorway for a moment. Then she said, "You look good," with a hesitation I hadn't heard in her voice in a long time. I turned, gave her a quick nod, and said, "Thanks," then grabbed my keys and walked out before she could say anything else. That was the night I realized how badly she miscalculated. She'd expected a fight, or begging, or submission. What she didn't anticipate was complete, grounded indifference. She hadn't counted on the version of me who would treat her with polite detachment, who would match her emotional vacancy with the precision of a man who was finally done bleeding for someone who kept asking for more. She began trying harder after that. Little things at first. She made dinner twice in 1 week and tried to sit next to me on the couch, bringing up old memories like that would somehow rekindle something she spent years extinguishing. She even tried touching my arm one night. A simple gesture, light, familiar, but it felt foreign now, like being tapped by someone wearing your partner's skin but speaking a different language. I didn't pull away, but I didn't return it either. That silence said more than any argument ever could. The next weekend, I took the kids out to the lake. Didn't tell Claire until we were already there. When she texted, asking where we'd gone, I waited 2 hours to respond, then sent a single sentence. Out with the twins, back later. No apology, no details. Just facts. When we got home, she was pacing by the window, trying to act casual. She asked why I hadn't told her we were going. I said she hadn't seemed interested lately, so I figured she wouldn't mind. That was when she said, "I'm still their mother, Nate. I have a right to know where they are." I looked her in the eye and said, "You're right. But you've also made it very clear I'm the one doing the parenting, so I've adjusted accordingly." She opened her mouth, then closed it again, realizing she had nothing to stand on. The kids ran in, yelling about the turtles they'd seen, and I turned my attention to them, leaving her in the hallway with her growing panic. What Claire didn't understand yet was that she'd won the argument that night in the kitchen, but lost the war for my investment entirely. And once you stop seeing someone as a partner, once you decide they're nothing more than a co-pilot for logistics, you don't get to be surprised when they stop flying toward your dreams. It wasn't until she realized she couldn't control the outcome that Claire finally started losing her grip on the script she'd written in her head. She had imagined I would crawl back emotionally, beg her to revisit her definition of connection, promise to grow or transform or apologize for some invisible crime. But instead of being broken, I became steady. Instead of begging, I became silent. Instead of clinging to a woman who'd already emotionally abandoned me, I invested everything into my children and myself. It started with small tells. She began hovering in doorways while I read to the kids, asking pointless questions she already knew the answers to just to be part of the moment. She brought home my favorite coffee one morning and placed it by the sink like it was some kind of peace offering wrapped in foam. Another night, she cooked dinner for the first time in weeks and pretended like it was just something she felt like doing. I thanked her without making eye contact and got back to wiping down the counter, not bothering to ask why she suddenly had time for acts of care now that I'd stopped performing like a trained dog for her approval. Then came the conversations she tried to ignite, the ones where she spoke slowly and clearly like she was trying to perform emotional intelligence she hadn't used in years. She'd ask if I was okay, if something had changed, if I was still angry. I'd respond the same way each time. I'm fine. Just focused on the kids. Focused on work. Focused on what matters. I never once mentioned her because she didn't qualify as a priority anymore, and deep down she knew it. What I gave her now was the version of myself she had spent years conditioning me into, emotionally distant, available only for logistics, calm but completely unreachable. Claire didn't know how to handle it. She started adjusting herself like she was back in the running for something. She put on lingerie that had been collecting dust in the back of the drawer, wore lipstick around the house even though she hadn't cared about appearance in years, started bringing up shows we used to watch together as if shared nostalgia would reignite something. She even complimented my physique one night, said I looked like the man she first fell in love with. I didn't even pause what I was doing, just nodded and said, "Took long enough," before walking past her to check on Ivy's reading assignment. The pressure finally broke during one late Thursday night after the kids were asleep. She came into the kitchen where I was cleaning up from dinner and leaned against the counter like she was about to deliver a confession. Her tone was soft, like she was trying to sound vulnerable without actually admitting fault. "You really don't care anymore, do you?" she asked, voice trembling at the edge of forced calm. I didn't look up from the plate I was drying. "About what?" I said flatly. She stepped forward, her arms crossed, her expression tense. "About us. About this. About anything between us." I set the plate down and met her eyes for the first time in what felt like weeks. "There is no us, Claire. You made that clear months ago. I'm just honoring your truth." Her mouth fell slightly open like she hadn't expected me to be so blunt, Or maybe she hoped there was still a piece of the old Nate buried under the new one. Someone she could manipulate back into obedience with just the right blend of sadness and confusion. I leaned in slightly, not angry but sharp. I've accepted it. You call me a co-parent. That's what I am now. Not a husband, not a partner. Just the guy who keeps everything moving. She blinked fast, fighting some kind of emotional reflex she clearly hadn't used in a while. That's not what I meant when I said that, she whispered. I was frustrated. I felt unheard. I didn't think you'd take it so literally. I couldn't help it, I laughed. Not out of humor, but disbelief. You didn't think I'd believe you meant the thing you said with complete conviction while washing a plate like it was no big deal. I shook my head. You can't weaponize honesty, then get upset when it cuts both ways. She said she wanted to fix things, said we owed it to the kids, to our history, to the family we built. I told her the time to fix it was before she decided I wasn't worth loving, before she started treating me like the emotional janitor for her mess, while she performed healing for an audience online. She kept saying it had all just been a moment of frustration, that she never meant for things to break like this. But I saw it in her face. She knew the truth. She hadn't meant for things to break because she never expected I'd have the strength to leave quietly. She expected the collapse to happen on my knees, not on my feet. She tried again a few days later, came home from some friend's party looking defeated and desperate. I was reading in the living room, and she stood in front of me like a child about to confess to stealing something. I don't know what to do anymore, she said softly. You've changed so much, and it's like you're not even angry. You're just gone. I didn't argue. She was exactly right. The version of me who once clung to hope was gone. The version who rearranged his life to fit into hers had evaporated the moment she confessed that I was no longer her match. I set the book down and said, You're just now realizing that? She nodded slowly and asked, Can't we fix this? Please. I told her no. That fixing requires two people who are willing to build again. But she had burned the blueprint and replaced it with a solo project. I'd just learned to stop offering to hold her hammer. What followed was a cascade of emotional desperation. She tried everything, cooked my favorite meals, offered to handle the school pickups, bought a book about rekindling marriages, and left it casually on the coffee table like some symbolic white flag. But I didn't engage. I was done holding her hand through the fire she lit herself. Then I overheard the phone call that ended whatever chance she thought was left. She was on the back porch, speaking quietly, but not quietly enough. I'd gone out to take the trash when I caught her saying, He's like a different person. Cold, mechanical, like he's rehearsed how to detach. I thought if I made him feel like he might lose me, he'd work harder. I didn't expect him to vanish. She paused, then added, I don't even think I want a divorce. I just wanted him to pay attention. Now he won't even look at me. That was the confirmation I didn't realize I'd been waiting for. It was never about truth or growth or personal evolution. It was about control. It was about putting a wedge between us just deep enough that I'd panic and come crawling back with a list of promises and apologies. She never thought I'd take her at her word and walk away internally. And now that she saw what life looked like without my emotional investment, she wanted it all back without ever admitting she destroyed it. I didn't confront her. I didn't need to. That night, I went into my office, printed out the divorce forms I'd prepared with the lawyer months earlier, and added the final details. I put everything in a folder and placed it in my bag. I wasn't angry. I wasn't afraid. I was ready to finish the slow-motion goodbye. She started with a single sentence over a rinsed dish and a dead stare. When I handed her the folder across the kitchen table, she didn't touch it right away. She just stared at it like it might bite, like something inside was going to explode the moment she opened it. I waited silently, watching her eyes scan the cover without blinking, her hands twitching slightly, her lips pressed together the way they always did when she realized she wasn't in control anymore. What is this? She finally asked, her voice barely audible, like her throat had dried out just from reading my expression. It's everything you've been pretending not to see, I told her calmly. Divorce paperwork, a proposed custody schedule, and financial disclosures. We're done, Claire. The silence that followed wasn't dramatic or emotional. It was heavy, like an earthquake that had already happened but left everything cracked underneath. She didn't speak for what felt like a full minute, and when she finally did, she reached for the folder slowly, like she expected it to vanish if she touched it too fast. Her hands trembled as she flipped it open, skimming the first few pages before stopping cold at the custody section. "You're filing for primary custody?" she said, not angry yet, just stunned, like it hadn't occurred to her that I might actually have rights too. I nodded. "I've documented everything. Every school function, every doctor's appointment, every weekend you were off somewhere else." She tried to regain footing fast, snapping back into the performative logic that used to shut me down. "You know the courts usually favor the mother. This isn't going to be easy for you." I didn't flinch, didn't raise my voice or blink. "That's why I hired someone better than your podcast friends," I replied evenly. "And because I've been the one raising these kids while you journal about healing, I'm not worried." She didn't expect that. I could see it in her eyes, the way they flicked back and forth across the papers like they were betraying her. She skipped past the breakdown of accounts, the timeline of my contributions, until she hit the page listing the real estate assets and froze. "This house is in your name only," she whispered, a confused horror in her tone. I nodded again, not out of cruelty, but because it was true and it mattered now. "Your credit never qualified. Remember all those cards you maxed out for personal development?" I kept the deed in my name just in case. That was when her composure cracked and panic started to leak through. She stood up too quickly, her chair scraping loudly against the tile, hands clenching as she tried to process the idea that I had planned for this long before she even knew there was a game being played. "You've been preparing this for months," she said, half accusing, half defeated. "I prepared the moment you decided I wasn't your match anymore," I said, my voice steady, without malice. "You made a choice. Now I'm making mine." The crying started next. It wasn't the dramatic, performative kind she'd used to end conversations or win pity. These were quieter, more desperate sobs, like she was mourning something real for the first time in years. "Please, Nate, just think about the kids. They need both of us. We can fix this, I swear. I'll stop the blog. I'll get a real job, whatever it takes." I looked at her and said the one thing she had never imagined I'd say. "You already made this decision. You just didn't expect me to agree with you." She tried one last thing, the one weapon she always kept in her back pocket, her own suffering. "You don't understand what I've been going through." I felt lost. I felt invisible. I just wanted someone to see me. I walked over to the sink, rinsed out my coffee cup, and answered without turning around. "I saw you every single day. I saw your exhaustion, your distance, your contempt. I saw you turning your back every time I reached out. I saw you choose yourself over and over while I carried all of us." She didn't follow me. She just sat there, staring at the folder again, like it was mocking her for waiting too long to care. The divorce itself went quickly. No dragged-out court battles, no grand gestures of reconciliation, just signatures and silence. The judge reviewed my documentation, the emails, the attendance records, the joint calendar that somehow had my name on every appointment. I was granted primary physical custody. Claire was given alternating weekends and one dinner night each week. She didn't even argue. She just sat in that courtroom in a beige blazer and a look of disbelief, like she still couldn't accept that the person she tried to emotionally write off had taken control of the story. I sold the house within 3 months and used the proceeds to buy a smaller place in a better school district. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine. 3 bedrooms, a fenced backyard, a home office where I could work while staying close to the twins. They adjusted faster than I expected, probably because the energy was lighter. No more walking on eggshells. No more pretending their mom's tension wasn't spreading through the house like smoke from an unattended fire. Claire moved into a modest 1-bedroom across town, started working as an admin at a local dentist's office. The blog vanished overnight. No explanation, no final post, just silence. The same kind she used to give me, now turned inward. I started dating again about a year after everything settled. Nothing rushed, nothing complicated. I met Eliza at a pediatric appointment when Julian had a sinus infection. She was a nurse, smart and grounded, with eyes that didn't scan for flaws while pretending to be curious. We started slow, Coffee dates while the kids were in class, hikes on weekends, movie nights where no one tried to psychoanalyze the plot for deeper metaphors. Eliza met the twins after a few months, and Ivy asked if she could braid her hair the second time they saw each other. That was all the approval I needed. Claire still tries sometimes. Not often, but enough to remind me of who she used to be. She calls after rough days, especially after bad dates, or when she feels the loneliness pressing too hard against her curated self-awareness. She asks if I'm happy, if I ever miss what we had, if maybe someday we could try again for the kids' sake. And every time she asks, I answer with the same sentence she once threw at me like it was a fact instead of a blade. We're just co-parents now, Claire. That's all we'll ever be. The kids are 12 now, smart, kind, full of humor that didn't come from either one of us directly. They still spend every other weekend with their mom, but the difference between those houses is night and day. One is warm, full of life and routine. The other is a waiting room. Ivy once told me that Claire's always on her phone when they're there, posting old pictures of happy memories instead of making new ones. Julian said it best the other night while we sat in the backyard watching stars push through the dark sky. You're the one who actually shows up, Dad. That was the moment I knew I'd made the right choice. Not because I'd won some legal battle, not because I got the house, or kept my savings, or moved on to someone better, but because my kids saw the truth without me ever having to explain it. They understood who had been present and who had performed. And that's all I ever wanted. For them to know that love isn't a performance, and presence isn't a burden. It's just what you do when someone matters to you more than the version of yourself you're trying to sell.